The Saturday morning sun had just cleared the ridgeline when Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore pulled her dusty Jeep into the gravel lot of Desert Ridge Public Range. The air already shimmered with heat. Arizona in late summer didn't believe in gentle mornings. She sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the low concrete building that had been a second home for most of her 25 years. 2 weeks. That's all the leave she had before boarding a transport back to God knows where for what would almost certainly be her final deployment. The doctors had been clear about that, even if they'd wrapped their prognosis in medical jargon and sympathetic looks. 18 months, maybe less, before the tremors in her hands progressed past the point where she could hold a rifle steady enough to meet Army standards. Elena flexed her fingers on the steering wheel, watching them quiver slightly in the morning light. Essential tremor, they called it. Genetic. Her father had it too, though he'd hidden it better than she did. Master Sergeant Thaddeus Whitmore had been shooting clean groups at 74 right up until the day his heart gave out on this very range. 3 years ago today. She reached across to the passenger seat and pulled the worn canvas rifle case toward her. The fabric was faded, patched in places with duct tape that had long since lost its adhesive properties. Inside was the M1 Garand that had belonged to her father, carried through Korea, kept as a personal weapon during his years as a civilian advisor, used to train 3 generations of Marine and Army snipers. The rifle was older than most of the shooters who'd be here today, and it had more combat experience than all of them combined. Elena shouldered the case and grabbed her range bag. Time to stop thinking and start moving. That's what Dad would have said. Thinking got you killed. Action kept you alive. The range door swung open before she reached it. Hank Bridgewater stood there, all 6'4" of retired sergeant major, wearing his usual uniform of faded jeans and a range safety officer polo that strained against his still impressive chest. "Morning, Lena," he said, voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Good to have you back stateside. Lane 5's open just like always." "Morning, Hank." She managed a small smile. "Place looks the same. Your daddy would haunt me if I changed anything." Hank held the door wider. "You doing okay today? I know what day it is." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. Hank had been there when her father collapsed, had tried CPR while they waited for the ambulance that arrived too late, had called her in Kandahar to tell her that Master Sergeant Thaddeus Whitmore was gone and that she needed to request emergency leave. That leave request had taken 46 hours to process. By the time Elena's boots hit American soil, her father was already in the ground. "I'm okay," she finally said. "Just need to shoot." Hank squeezed her shoulder with a hand that could have crushed concrete. "Lane 5, take your time." The range was quiet this early. A couple of serious shooters occupied lanes at the far end, their focus absolute as they worked through precision drills with expensive competition rifles. Elena moved to lane 5, her father's favorite, and began the ritual of unpacking. She dressed deliberately casual today. Oversized flannel shirt that had been her dad's, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Faded jeans with a rip in one knee. Scuffed hiking boots that had seen better days. Her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing that screamed active duty military. Nothing that said she'd spent the last 7 years behind a rifle scope watching enemy combatants through magnified optics before sending precision rounds downrange at distances most people couldn't comprehend. The M1 Garand slid from its case with the whisper of metal on canvas. The rifle was a thing of beauty and brutality in equal measure. 8 pounds, 9 ounces of walnut and steel. The finish had worn down to bare metal in places where her father's hands had gripped it 10,000 times. The stock bore scratches and dents, each one a story she'd never fully know. The sling was frayed, held together more by habit than actual structural integrity. Elena ran her hand along the barrel, feeling the ghosts of every shot this weapon had fired. Korea, Desert Storm training, countless competitions, and that final string of fire 3 years ago when her father had demonstrated the rapid-fire drill he'd perfected over 50 years of shooting 5 rounds, one ragged hole, faster than most men could blink. His heart had stopped before the brass hit the ground. She shook off the memory and began loading magazines. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pressing 30, most 6 rounds into the end block clip with steady pressure. The tremor was there. It was always there now, but not bad yet. Mornings were better. By afternoon, her hands would shake badly enough that civilians noticed. By evening, she sometimes had trouble holding a coffee cup steady. But right now, right here, she could still load a rifle. The sound of voices, loud, brash, overconfident, cut through the range's quiet atmosphere like a chainsaw through silk. Elena looked up to see four young men spilling through the entrance, their arrival announced by laughter and the metallic jangle of tactical gear. They couldn't have been older than 23, each one decked out in brand new equipment that still had creases from the packaging. Plate carriers without plates, making them essentially expensive vests. Drop leg holsters positioned so low they'd interfere with running. Oakley sunglasses worn indoors, because of course they were. Fresh from basic training, Elena assessed automatically. On leave before first deployment. Infantry, probably. All the arrogance of youth combined with just enough training to be dangerous. They claimed lanes 7 through 10 making enough noise for twice their number. One of them, tall blonde, with the kind of jawline that suggested he'd been popular in high school, seemed to be the ringleader. He was showing the others something on his phone, all of them laughing at whatever tactical wisdom he'd pulled from social media. Elena returned her attention to her rifle, shutting out the noise. She had 60 minutes before the range got crowded. 60 minutes to honor her father's memory by shooting the drill he'd perfected. 60 minutes to prove to herself that the Tremors hadn't taken everything yet. The sound of rapid, uncontrolled gunfire erupted from the other end of the range. Elena winced. The blond kid and his friends had started shooting their Glock 19s with all the precision of a garden hose on full spray. Rounds were hitting paper, sure, but the groups were terrible, 8, 10, 12 inches at 7 yards. They celebrated each mediocre string of fire like they'd just won the Olympics. "Did you see that?" one of them shouted. "That's what I'm talking about. Dude, you're a natural. That's some operator shit right there." Elena closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She'd seen this before. Young soldiers fresh out of training convinced that putting rounds on target at close range made them shooters. They hadn't learned yet that shooting on a flat range, with no stress and no consequences, was nothing like shooting when someone was shooting back, when your hands were shaking from adrenaline, when your heart was hammering so hard you could see your rifle scope pulse with each beat. She'd learned those lessons in Kandahar, in Helmand province, in Syria on a rooftop at 3 in the morning with hostile forces closing on her position and a target that had to be neutralized before he reached the detonator for an IED that would kill a dozen Rangers. But these kids didn't need to hear that story. They'd learn their own lessons in their own time, or they wouldn't come home. Elena picked up the M1 Garand and moved to the firing line, trying to ignore the circus happening 40 yards away. "Hey, sweetheart." The voice cut across the range loud and sharp. Elena kept her eyes forward, loading the end-block clip into her rifle with a practiced motion. The clip seated with a satisfying metallic click. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Footsteps on concrete coming closer. Elena sighed internally and turned. The blonde ringleader stood at the edge of her lane, hands on his hips, grinning like he'd just told the world's funniest joke. His friends clustered behind him, all of them wearing identical expressions of amused condescension. "You lost," he asked, that grin widening. "Yoga studio is down the street. This is a gun range." Elena studied him for a moment, young, maybe 23. Name tape on his brand new tactical vest read Cunningham. Fresh haircut, high and tight, still sharp enough to cut paper. The kind of kid who'd enlisted thinking the army was going to be like Call of Duty. "I'm aware of what kind of facility this is," Elena said quietly. "I've been coming here since I was 6. One of Cunningham's friends, stockier with red hair and freckles, laughed. "6, your daddy bring you here to watch him shoot." "Something like that." "That's cute," the redhead continued. "But seriously, you probably shouldn't be handling that thing alone. Those old rifles have a lot of recoil. You could hurt yourself." Elena felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settling over her. This conversation. She'd had it 1,000 times in 1,000 variations. On the range in the chow hall during qualification courses. Always the same assumption. Always the same smirk. Always the same surprise when she outshot them. "I appreciate your concern," she said, keeping her voice level. "But I'll be fine." Cunningham stepped closer, pulling a money clip from his pocket with a flourish. He peeled off a $100 bill and waved it in front of her face like a hypnotist's watch. "Tell you what, I'm feeling generous today. I'll bet you this $100 you can't hit anywhere on that target. One shot 10 yards. He gestured toward her paper target downrange. If you can hit the paper anywhere at all, you take the money. You miss, you pack up your grandpa's rifle and give us your lane. We need the space for dynamic drills." His friends laughed. One of them, thin, dark-haired, with nervous energy, was already recording on his phone. "We're going to get so many likes from this," the dark-haired kid said. "Girl tries to shoot, can't handle the recoil, probably cries. It's going to be viral." Elena looked at the $100 bill, then at Cunningham's face, then at the three friends who thought this was the funniest thing they'd seen all week. She could walk away. Should walk away. She was here to honor her father, not to teach lessons to overconfident children playing soldier. But something in Cunningham's smirk reminded her of every man who'd ever looked at her uniform and assumed she was a clerk or a medic or anything except what she actually was. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out her own wallet. She counted out $500 in mixed bills and placed them on the shooting bench. "Different bet," she said. Cunningham's eyes widened slightly at the cash. "Whoa, you're serious. 5 shots. All 5 have to hit inside the red bullseye, that 3-inch circle in the center. If even one shot lands outside the red, I pack up and leave. You take my money." Elena met his eyes steadily. "All 5 inside the red. I take your money and you apologize to Hank for disrupting his range. Then you leave quietly." The stocky redhead whistled. "5 shots in that tiny circle with that dinosaur rifle, lady. You're gonna lose so bad." "Maybe," Elena said. "That's what makes it a bet." Cunningham looked at his friends, then back at Elena. The math was clearly happening behind his eyes. $500 said she was confident, but he'd watched her hands as she loaded the rifle. He'd seen the tremor, probably thought she had some medical condition or was just naturally shaky. No way someone with unsteady hands could put 5 rounds in a 3-inch circle. "You're on," he said, pulling more cash from his money clip and slamming it down next to hers. "But don't take all day. We've got Instagram content to shoot." The thin kid with the phone moved closer, making sure he had a good angle. Elena picked up the M1, Garand feeling the rifle settle into her hands like it had been grown there. This weapon knew her father before her, knew the rhythm of careful breathing and patient trigger presses, knew what it meant to serve. She picked up her ear protection, old Peltor muffs that had belonged to her father held together with electrical tape, and settled them over her ears. The world compressed into a smaller space. Just her, the rifle, and the target 50 feet away. Cunningham was still talking, saying something to his friends, but Elena couldn't hear him anymore. Didn't need to. The range had narrowed to a single point of focus. She checked her surroundings with practiced efficiency. Range clear, no one downrange. Safety protocols observed. The same checks she'd done 1,000 times in training, another 1,000 in combat. Elena brought the M1 Garand to low, ready muzzle pointed at the floor at a 45-degree angle, finger outside the trigger guard. Her posture shifted without conscious thought. The slight stoop that civilian life had allowed her to develop vanished. Her spine straightened, feet planted shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. Weight balanced. Elbows pulled in tight to her body, creating a skeletal structure that would absorb recoil and return the rifle to the same point for each shot. This was the stance her father had taught her when she was 8 years old. The stance that had carried her through Ranger qualification. The stance that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. For just a moment, she wasn't 25-year-old Elena Whitmore fighting a genetic condition that was slowly stealing her career. She was every version of herself that had ever stood behind this rifle. 8 years old, learning to sight down the barrel. 16, winning her first competition. 21, making her first combat shot. 24, setting the record for the longest successful female sniper engagement in U.S. military history. Behind her, Cunningham yelled, "Ready when you are, Grandma. Try not to have a heart attack from the recoil." Hank's voice cut through the noise, professional and calm. "Range is hot. Shooter, you may fire when ready." Elena took a breath, let it out halfway, felt her heart rate slow to that strange, quiet place between beats where the world became crystal clear. She raised the rifle in a single smooth motion. Front sight post found the center of the target like a compass, needle finding north. Her finger moved to the trigger, not jerking, not slapping, just the gentle taking up of slack that her father had made her practice 10,000 times. The first shot broke clean. The M1 Garand roared a sound like God slamming a door. The rifle came back into her shoulder, the recoil channeling through bone and muscle into the earth. Before the rifle had fully returned to battery, Elena's finger was already on the trigger, again taking up slack, finding that perfect pressure point. Second shot, third, fourth, fifth. The entire string lasted 1.3 seconds. To the untrained ear, it sounded like a single extended explosion, a tearing sound like heavy canvas being ripped by invisible hands. Brass casings arced through the air in a golden stream, catching the overhead lights, each one spinning its own small orbit before clattering onto the concrete. The slide locked back on an empty magazine. Smoke curled from the barrel, carrying the acrid bite of burned powder, the smell of a weapon that had just done its job. Elena mechanically dropped the magazine, cleared the chamber, and set the rifle down on the bench with the action open. Her hands moved through the motions without conscious thought, safety protocols drilled so deeply into her muscle memory that she could perform them in her sleep. Behind her, someone was laughing. Elena removed her ear protection and turned to see Cunningham pointing at her target, his face split by a triumphant grin. "You missed," he crowed. "I heard 5 bangs, sure, but look at the target. There's only one hole. You threw 4 rounds into the dirt, sweetheart. You got lucky with 1 shot, I'll give you that, but the bet was 5 shots in the red." He reached for the money on the bench. Elena's hand moved faster than thought, clamping down on Cunningham's wrist before his fingers touched the cash. The grip was firm, not painful, but absolutely immovable. She'd held on to helicopter skids and 40-knot winds with these hands. She'd hung from cliff faces and pulled wounded soldiers to safety. A cocky kid from basic training wasn't breaking her grip. "Wait," she said quietly. "For what you lost, I've got eyes. 1 hole on target, which means you missed 4. Go look at the hole." "I don't need to." "Go look at the hole." Something in Elena's voice made Cunningham shut his mouth. His 3 friends had stopped laughing, sensing that the dynamic had shifted in some way they didn't quite understand. From the control booth, Hank's voice came over the speaker system. "Bring that target forward. Let's settle this properly." The electric motor hummed to life, and the target carrier began its journey from downrange to the firing line. 50 feet of travel at a slow, steady pace. Elena released Cunningham's wrist and stepped back, crossing her arms. The red-headed kid, his name tape read. Brennan leaned toward Cunningham and whispered, "Dude, I think we made a mistake." "Shut up," Cunningham hissed back. "She missed. We all saw it. 1 hole." But as the target drew closer, Cunningham's certainty began to waver. The hole he'd seen from 50 feet away hadn't looked quite right. It had seemed too large somehow, misshapen. The carrier clicked to a stop at the firing line. Elena reached out and unclipped the paper target, laying it flat on the shooting bench. All 5 men crowded around to look. The hole in the center of the bullseye wasn't round. It was ragged, torn with edges that looked like they'd been burned and then shredded. The paper around it was blackened with powder residue. And the hole itself was elongated, not circular, but oblong-shaped, almost like a flower with distinct petals. Hank emerged from the control booth, walking over with the measured pace of a man who'd seen this particular magic trick before. He pulled a pen from his pocket and used it to trace the edges of the hole. "Count them," he said. Cunningham leaned closer, squinting. The hole wasn't 1 hole, it was 5 holes so close together that they formed a single ragged opening in the paper. But if you looked carefully, really carefully, you could see where each individual bullet had passed through. That's impossible," Cunningham whispered. "Nobody shoots that fast." It sounded like full auto. "And to group them like that," Hank said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years in the military. "At that speed. Son, what you just witnessed is called a bill drill on steroids. 5 rounds, 1 target, 0.18 second splits. Maybe faster." The dark-haired kid with the phone, Pritchard, his name tape read, had gone pale. Who are you?" Hank looked at Elena, one eyebrow raised. She gave the smallest nod. "Gentlemen," Hank said, his voice taking on the formal tone of a military briefing, "you just tried to hustle Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore. 75th Ranger Regiment, Sniper Section. 3 combat deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. 47 confirmed kills. Current record holder for the longest successful engagement by a female sniper in United States military history. 2,347 meters, Helmand Province, 2023. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the other shooters at the far end of the range had stopped to listen. She's also, Hank continued, warming to his subject, a three-time national high-power rifle champion in civilian competition. Learned to shoot from Master Sergeant Thaddeus Whitmore, Marine Corps, who trained scout snipers at Camp Pendleton for 3 decades and is widely considered one of the finest rifle instructors this country ever produced. Cunningham had gone from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in the span of 30 seconds. Master Sergeant Whitmore, the one they called the Ghost. That's the one, Elena said quietly. He was my father. The fourth member of Cunningham's group, Hollister, according to his name tape, suddenly looked like he might be sick. Your father, did he train Rangers at Fort Benning? Among others, Elena said. He trained Army Marines, even some SEALs who wanted to learn old-school fundamentals. Hollister's voice came out strangled. My brother, Staff Sergeant Wade Hollister, 2nd Ranger Battalion. He trained under a Sergeant Whitmore in 2008. He talked about him all the time, said he was the best instructor he ever had. Elena's expression softened slightly. I remember that class. Your brother had excellent fundamentals. Natural shooter. Had Hollister repeated the word, dropping like a stone. He died in Afghanistan, 2011. I'm sorry for your loss. The weight of that simple sentence seemed to push all the air out of Cunningham and his friends. They stood there, 4 young men who'd come to the range to play at being soldiers, suddenly confronted with the reality of what military service actually meant. Brennan, the redhead, found his voice first. Ma'am, we didn't know. We were completely out of line. You were acting like privates, Elena said. The word carried no venom, just statement of fact. Loud, cocky, untrained, playing dress-up with empty plate carriers. She picked up in father's M1 Garand and held it out toward Cunningham. Here, feel the weight. Cunningham took the rifle gingerly, like it might explode in his hands. It's heavy. 8 pounds, 9 ounces. My primary sniper rifle is 17 pounds, fully loaded. I carry it 20 miles in mountain terrain. Your Glock, oh. Elena nodded toward the pistol on Cunningham's belt. That's a sidearm, a backup. You boys are infantry-bound, celebrating mediocre pistol groups like you won a medal. Pritchard, still filming, lowered his phone. We just finished basic. We thought we were ready. Ready for what? Elena's voice was gentle now, but there was steel underneath. Ready to get yourselves killed. Ready to get your team killed because you think putting rounds on paper at 7 yards makes you a shooter. She took the M1 back from Cunningham and set it on the bench. You want to know what makes a shooter, what separates the ones who come home from the ones who don't? All 4 of them nodded. Humility, Elena said. The soldiers who think they know everything get themselves killed. The ones who stay humble, who stay teachable, they come home. My father trained over 3,000 military shooters in 40 years. 127 of them were killed in action. He remembered every single name. She reached into her range bag and pulled out a worn leather journal, its cover softened by decades of handling. He kept records, names, dates, circumstances, made me read it after he died. Elena opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Staff Sergeant Wade Hollister, 2nd Ranger Battalion, killed in training accident, Fort Benning, June 23, 2011. Malfunction drill, rifle double-fed. He froze another soldier's negligent discharge hit him. She looked up at Hollister. Your brother didn't die in combat. He died in training because he froze during a weapon malfunction. Hollister's face crumpled. They never told us the details. Just said training accident. I'm telling you now because you need to understand something. Combat isn't the only thing that kills soldiers. Complacency kills. Arrogance kills. Thinking you're too good for fundamentals, that kills. Elena closed the journal. Your brother was a good shooter, but he never fully mastered malfunction clearance. My father noted it right here. Too much thumb pressure on grip, hesitates during double feed drills. Those hesitation cost him his life. The 4 young men stood in silence, the weight of Elena's words settling over them like a physical presence. Cunningham reached for the money on the shooting bench and pushed all of it, his 100 plus the 500 Elena had put down, toward her. Ma'am, I can't take this. We were wrong about everything. Elena looked at the money, then at the four faces watching her. Young, scared beneath the bravado, heading toward deployments that would either teach them hard lessons or kill them. She'd been where they were once, thought she knew everything, had her edges smoothed off by instructors who cared enough to be hard on her when she needed it. Keep it, she said. Donate it to the Wounded Warrior Project box at the front desk. She started to pack up her father's rifle. Wait, Cunningham said. Please. We deploy to Germany next month, then probably forward to advisory roles somewhere that'll actually see action. Could you teach us whatever you have time for, however much you are willing to share? Elena paused, her hands on the rifle case. I'm on leave, 2 weeks before I redeploy. Even one day would be more than we'd get anywhere else. She turned back to them, studying their faces. Looking past the tactical gear and the bravado to the truth underneath, they were terrified. They knew they weren't ready, and they were smart enough to ask for help. That counted for something. Monday morning, Elena said, 0600. TE uniform's not your tactical cosplay gear. You're late, I'm gone. I have something I need to do tomorrow. We'll be here at 0545, Cunningham promised. Sergeant, I'm on leave. Call me Lena. They nodded, then moved back to their lanes, the energy completely different now. No more loud celebration. No more rapid-fire spray and pray. They shot carefully, checking their stances, actually trying to improve. Elena finished packing her father's rifle and stood to leave. As she walked past Hank's booth, the old sergeant major leaned out the window. Thad would be proud of you, he said quietly. Elena's throat tightened. I froze at the end, couldn't finish the drill. You shot the drill that killed him on the anniversary of his death at the place where he died. The fact that you didn't break down crying counts as a win in my book. Hank's weathered face creased into a smile. And you just agreed to train 4 knuckleheads who desperately need it. That's what he would have done. Yeah, Elena said, that's what worries me. He gave everything to training soldiers. Died with a rifle in his hands. Worse ways to go, Sergeant. I suppose. Elena walked out to her Jeep, the morning sun now fully risen and already baking the parking lot. She loaded the rifle case into the back, then sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Her hands were shaking worse now. Not just the tremor, but actual trembling from adrenaline and emotion. She'd done it, shot at her father's drill. Not perfectly, she'd only managed 5 shots when he used to do 8, but she'd done it, and she hadn't broken down. Progress, she supposed. Elena pulled out her phone and opened the calendar. 14 days of leave left. Then back to whatever classified operation the Army had planned for her final deployment. The doctors had been clear, after this one, her condition would likely progress to the point where she'd be medically retired. No more deployments, no more combat, no more being the thing that she'd spent her entire adult life becoming. But she had 14 days. And tomorrow she'd spend one of them teaching 4 scared kids how to stay alive. It wasn't glory, it wasn't combat. It wasn't even particularly important in the grand scheme of the war machine. But her father had spent 40 years doing exactly this. Teaching, training, passing on the skills that kept soldiers breathing. Maybe that was the real legacy. Not the kills she'd confirmed, not the records she'd set, but the knowledge she could pass on before the tremors took her ability to demonstrate it. Elena started the Jeep and pulled out of the parking lot. Tomorrow 0600, she had work to do. Behind her in the range, 4 young soldiers practiced their fundamentals with new focus, their phones forgotten, their egos checked. They didn't know it yet, but they just encountered the kind of instructor who could mean the difference between coming home with medals or coming home in a flag-draped box. If they were smart, if they stayed humble and teachable, Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore might just save their lives. Speed was fine, but accuracy was final. And tomorrow they'd learn exactly what that meant. The digital clock on Elena's nightstand read 0512 when she gave up on sleep and swung her legs out of bed. Dreams had chased her through the night, fragmented images of her father demonstrating the same drill she'd shot yesterday, his hands steady and sure, while hers trembled and missed. In the dream, he'd turned to look at her with disappointment in his eyes, and she'd woken with her heart racing. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, flexing her fingers in the pre-dawn darkness. The tremor was there, always worse in moments of stress or fatigue, but manageable. Still manageable. Elena dressed in her Army PT uniform, gray shirt with the black Army logo, black shorts, running shoes that had seen better days. She caught a reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw her father's eyes looking back at her. Same green-gray color, same intensity. Sometimes she wondered if he'd passed her more than just his shooting skills and his genetic condition. Maybe he'd given her his inability to walk away from soldiers who needed training. The drive to Desert Ridge Range took 20 minutes in the early morning emptiness. Elena arrived at 05:35 to find four figures already standing in the parking lot wearing PT uniforms as instructed. They stood at a loose approximation of attention, clearly unsure of the protocol for this situation. Cunningham stepped forward as Elena climbed out of her Jeep. "Sergeant, I mean Lena, we're ready." "You're early. Good." Elena shouldered her range bag and father's rifle case. "Follow me." Inside, Hank had already opened the range and started coffee. The smell filled the building, bitter and strong, the way soldiers learned to drink it. He handed Elena a paper cup without asking if she wanted any. "Got lanes 1 through 5 reserved for you," Hank said. "Should give you space to work without bothering the other shooters." "Thanks, Hank. Your daddy's training props are in the storage room. I pulled them out last night. Figured you might need them." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. "You're good people, Hank. Just passing on what Thad taught me helped the next generation survive." She led the four recruits to lane 1 and had them set down their range bags. In the fluorescent lighting, they looked even younger than yesterday. Cunningham couldn't be more than 23. Brennan and Pritchard looked like they might still get carded at bars. Hollister had an old soul's eyes, the kind that came from losing someone close. "Before we touch a single weapon," Elena said, "we're going to talk about cleaning. Strip your Glocks. Show me how you maintain them." The four men pulled their pistols and began field stripping with the mechanical efficiency of recent training. Slides came off, recoil springs emerged, barrels were removed. They moved through the motions competently enough. "Now," Elena said, "show me how you clean the extractor." Four pairs of hands froze. Brennan looked up, confusion clear on his freckled face. "The what?" "The extractor. Small metal hook on the inside of the slide that pulls the spent casing out of the chamber. Show me how you clean it." Silence. "You don't know where it is, do you?" Elena's voice was gentle, but the point landed like a hammer. "You've been shooting these pistols, celebrating your groups, and you don't actually know how they work." Cunningham's face flushed. "They taught us basic field stripping and basic, just enough to maintain, just enough to pass inspection," Elena interrupted. "Not enough to keep you alive when the weapon malfunctions downrange and you need to diagnose the problem in 30 seconds. Die." She pulled her own Glock 19 from her range bag, a well-worn service weapon with holster marks on the finish and grips that had been customized for her smaller hands. She field stripped it in smooth practice motions, then pointed to each component. Extractor, firing pin, spring assembly. Each one of these can fail. Each failure has a different symptom and a different fix. You need to know these parts like you know your own fingers. For the next hour, Elena walked them through detailed disassembly and reassembly, making them name each component, explain its function, and demonstrate proper cleaning technique. Pritchard kept fumbling the small parts. Brennan's fingers were too large for some of the delicate work. Hollister moved with careful precision as if handling his brother's ghost. "My father used to say that a weapon is only as reliable as the person maintaining it," Elena said, watching them work. "He trained Marines who went into Hughes City with M16s that jammed in the mud. Some of those Marines died because they hadn't maintained their weapons properly. Others survived because they knew their rifle intimately enough to clear any malfunction in seconds." She pulled out the worn leather journal from her bag and opened it to a page marked with a faded photograph. The photo showed a young Marine, maybe 19, grinning at the camera with an M16 slung over his shoulder. Lance Corporal Daniel Mitchell, 23 years old, killed in Hughes City, February 1968. Rifle jammed during close quarters combat. He tried to clear it, but didn't know the proper sequence for a double feed malfunction. Died with a broken rifle in his hands. Elena looked up at the four young faces watching her. "My father kept this photo for 50 years. Kept the journal entry describing exactly how Chen had died." "You know why?" "To remember him," Hollister asked quietly. "To teach people like you. Every name in this journal is a lesson. Every death is a warning. Elena closed the journal. Your weapons are not accessories. They're not fashion statements. They're life support systems that only work if you understand them completely. She had them reassemble their pistols, then disassemble again, then reassemble faster. By the 20th repetition, their hands moved with new confidence. Pritchard stopped fumbling. Brennan's large fingers found efficiency and economy of motion. Better, Elena said. Now we shoot. She pulled out the props Hank had retrieved from storage. Her father's training aids, some of them older than she was. Snap caps for dry fire practice. Shot timer for measuring split times. Training targets marked with scoring zones. And a small wooden box containing the tool her father had used to humble countless cocky shooters over the years. Elena opened the box and removed a single empty brass casing, .45 caliber polished until it gleamed. This, she said, holding up the brass, is the balance drill. You place it on your slide and press the trigger without dropping it. Teaches trigger control better than 1,000 live rounds. She demonstrated setting the brass on her Glock's slide and pressing the trigger with slow, steady pressure. The hammer fell with a click. The brass didn't move. That's impossible, Brennan said. Your hand has to move when you press the trigger. Your hand does move. The question is whether you can press straight to the rear without disturbing the weapon's alignment. Elena handed the brass to Cunningham. Your turn. Cunningham placed the brass on his slide with exaggerated care. He began pressing the trigger. The brass fell off before the hammer dropped. Again. He tried 15 times. The brass fell every time. Pritchard managed to keep it balanced through the trigger press on his 23rd attempt. Brennan needed 47 tries. Hollister, moving with that same careful precision, achieved it on his 18th attempt. Hollister, Elena said, your brother had the same natural trigger control. It's in the journal, excellent natural feel for trigger press. Hollister's hands shook slightly as he set up for another repetition. Did Dad tell him that? My father told him he had a gift, that he shouldn't waste it by getting cocky. Elena's voice softened. Your brother took that seriously. According to the journal, he volunteered for extra training sessions, spent his off hours practicing fundamentals. Then why did he die? The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Elena met Hollister's eyes, because knowing something intellectually and performing it under stress are different skills. Your brother understood malfunction clearance, but when his rifle jammed during a live fire drill with other soldiers shooting around him, his brain froze. Stress response took over. He forgot the sequence. She picked up her Glock and cycled through a series of deliberate malfunctions, stovepipe failure to feed double feed. Her hands moved through the clearance drills with mechanical efficiency, each one taking less than 3 seconds. These drills need to be so deep in your muscle memory that you do them while thinking about something else. So automatic that stress can't interfere. Elena looked at each of them. We're going to practice until you can clear any malfunction in your sleep, until your hands know what to do even when your brain is screaming. For the next 2 hours, Elena ran them through malfunction drills with religious intensity. She'd load their magazines with snap caps mixed randomly with live rounds, creating stoppages they couldn't predict. They'd be in the middle of a string of fire when suddenly the gun would click instead of bang. Their task was to diagnose and clear without conscious thought. Cunningham improved steadily, his natural competitiveness driving him to master each drill. Brennan struggled with the fine motor skills required for double feed clearance. Pritchard kept trying to go too fast, fumbling steps in his hurry. Hollister moved with increasing confidence, his hands remembering patterns his brother had learned. Tap, rack, bang for simple stoppages, Elena coached. But if you see brass in the ejection port in a round trying to feed, that's a double feed. Lock the slide back, rip the magazine out, rack 3 times to clear the chamber, reload chamber a round. 5 seconds or you're dead. She made them practice while she yelled commands simulating combat stress. Made them practice after doing push-ups until their arms shook. Made them practice while standing on one leg, while spinning in circles, while Hank played loud music through the range speakers. By mid-morning, their hands moved with new authority. Brennan cleared a double feed in 4.2 seconds. Pritchard managed a failure to feed clearance in under 2 seconds. Cunningham ran through all 3 malfunction types in sequence without error. Elena called a break and led them outside where picnic tables sat under a ramada offering shade from the climbing Arizona sun. She'd brought water bottles and protein bars. The four men collapsed onto the benches exhausted but energized. My brother never talked about training, Hollister said, chugging water. But now I get why. This isn't fun. It's not exciting. It's just hard work. That's the secret nobody tells you, Elena said. Real skill isn't exciting. It's repetitive. It's boring. It's doing the same drill for the 1,000th time, even though you're tired of it. She pulled out her own water bottle, and Cunningham noticed her hands shaking as she opened it. Lena, he said carefully, can I ask you something personal? You can ask, I might not answer. Your hands, the shaking, are you okay? Elena took a long drink before answering. Essential tremor, genetic condition, my father had it too, it's progressive, gets worse over time. Can they treat it? They can manage symptoms, but not cure it. She flexed her fingers, watching them quiver slightly. Army doctors give me 18 months, maybe less, before I can't shoot to standard anymore. Pritchard's eyes widened. Wait, you mean you might get medically retired, but you're one of the best shooters in the military? Doesn't matter. If I can't meet qualification standards, I'm done. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, but something underneath spoke of deeper pain. That's why I'm teaching you everything I can now. This deployment I'm about to do, it's probably my last. After that, the tremors will have progressed too far. Brennan leaned forward. How do you shoot with it? Your groups yesterday were perfect. Fundamentals. My father drilled them into me so deeply that muscle memory compensates for the tremor. My hands shake, but my structure doesn't. She demonstrated by extending her arms as if holding a rifle. Despite the visible tremor in her fingers, her elbows and shoulders remained rock steady. The tremor is in the small muscles. But if you build your shooting platform on skeletal structure bones, not muscles, the shake doesn't transfer to the weapon. That's why you made us focus on elbow position, Cunningham said, understanding dawning, and keeping our shoulders locked. Exactly. Most shooters muscle their way through recoil. That works when you're young and strong, but structure beats strength every time. My father was shooting clean groups at 74 because his structure was perfect. Hollister pulled out his phone and pulled up a photo. This is my brother, last picture he sent before he died. Elena looked at the screen, a young soldier, early 20s, standing in front of a Humvee, somewhere dusty and brown. He had Hollister's same eyes, that same old soul quality. He looks like a good man, she said. He was. After he died, my parents, they didn't handle it well. Dad blamed the Army for not training him properly. Mom blamed Dad for encouraging him to enlist in the first place. They divorced within a year. Hollister's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. I joined to finish what he started, to prove it wasn't for nothing. And now you're terrified you'll make the same mistakes he did. Aren't you terrified you'll make a mistake and get someone killed? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Every single day, I've made 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. Every one of them, I calculated wind speed, air density, temperature, Coriolis effect. I did the math, made the shot, confirmed the kill, and every single time I was terrified I'd miss and the target would escape and kill more of our people. She looked at each of them. Fear doesn't make you weak. Fear keeps you sharp. The soldiers who should scare you are the ones who aren't afraid anymore. Were you afraid yesterday? Pritchard asked. When you shot that drill. Terrified. That drill killed my father. I hadn't shot it in 3 years because I was scared I couldn't do it anymore. Scared the tremors had taken it from me. Elena's voice dropped lower. I'm still not sure I can do it at speed when it matters. Yesterday was 5 rounds. My father used to do 8. Used to do it in under a second. But you did it, Cunningham said. That's what matters. Maybe. Elena stood, stretching muscles that remembered too many hours in Overwatch positions. Break's over. We still have sight alignment to cover in environmental shooting and movement drills. The afternoon session was brutal. Elena had them shooting from prone, kneeling, standing, shooting while moving laterally, shooting immediately after sprinting 50 yards to simulate combat fatigue. She made them wear weighted vests to approximate combat load, made them shoot with one eye closed, then both eyes open, teaching them to use both techniques depending on the situation. In Kandahar, she said, I took a shot at 1,800 meters. I'd been in position for 6 hours. Dehydrated, exhausted, wearing 70 pounds of gear in 115-degree heat. When the target finally appeared, I had maybe 10 seconds to range him, calculate windage, and take the shot before he disappeared into a building. She demonstrated the prone position, showing them how to build a stable platform using only their body and a rifle. No bipod, no sandbags, just bone structure and breath control. The fundamentals saved my life that day because I was too tired to rely on anything else. Pritchard struggled with prone, shooting his long frame awkward on the ground. Brennan excelled at it, his stocky build giving him natural stability. Cunningham and Hollister both showed improvement, their groups tightening as they internalized the lessons. Hollister, Elena called, your natural trigger controls being wasted by poor breathing. Watch. She had him assume firing position, then placed her hand on his back to feel his breathing pattern. You're holding your breath too long. Brain starts running out of oxygen, muscles start to shake. Breathe normally until you're ready to fire, then pause naturally between breaths. You have about 4 seconds before your body starts demanding air. Hollister tried again, following her coaching. His group tightened dramatically. Better. Your brother had the same issue, it's in the journal. He overcorrected it by taking too many breaths and hyperventilating. Elena's voice was gentle. You're better than he was at this point in training. He'd be proud of that. By late afternoon, they'd fired over 300 rounds each. Their hands were blistered despite shooting gloves. Their shoulders were bruised from recoil. They smelled of gun smoke and sweat and determination. Elena called them together at Lane 1 as the sun angled through the range's high windows. You've improved 400% since yesterday, she said. Your groups are tighter, your malfunction clearance is faster. You're actually thinking about fundamentals instead of just making noise. Does that mean we're ready? Cunningham asked. Ready for what? A firefight number combat requires thousands of repetitions under hundreds of scenarios. You've had 1 day. Elena's expression was serious. But you're ready to understand what you don't know. That's the first step toward actually becoming competent. She reached into her range bag and pulled out 4 laminated cards. Each one bore a list written in faded ink, her father's handwriting. Master Sergeant Thaddeus Whitmore's 10 Rules of Combat Shooting, Elena said, handing 1 card to each man. He gave these to every student he trained. I've added an 11th rule of my own. Cunningham read aloud, Rule 1, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, fast is survival. Rule 2, structure beats strength. Rule 3, fundamentals never fail, only shooters do. The list continued through 10 rules, each one a distilled piece of wisdom earned through decades of training and combat. At the bottom, in different handwriting, Elena's was an 11th rule. Technology fails, Pritchard read. Fundamentals don't. I added that after my scope got damaged by shrapnel in Afghanistan, Elena said. Had to take a shot at 1,800 meters with iron sights only. The fundamentals my father drilled into me were the only reason I made that shot. Hollister stared at his card, then looked up at Elena. You said there were 127 names in the journal. Soldiers your father trained who died. That's right. How many of them followed these rules? Elena's jaw tightened. All of them. Following the rules doesn't guarantee survival. It just improves your odds. Then what does guarantee survival? Nothing. That's the reality of combat. You can do everything right and still die because someone else makes a mistake, or because the enemy gets lucky, or because the universe is fundamentally random and chaos doesn't care about your training. Elena's voice hardened. But I'd rather die knowing I did everything right than die because I was too cocky to practice fundamentals. The range had grown quiet. Even the shooters in other lanes had stopped to listen. This Sunday, Elena said, the range hosts my father's memorial competition. 3 years to the day since he died. Shooters come from all over the state, military, law enforcement, civilians. All proceeds go to military family support organizations. Will you compete? Brennan asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment. I haven't competed since he died. I watch, I judge, but I don't shoot. Why not? You're still the best shooter here. Because if I miss in front of the military shooting community, they'll start asking questions about whether I'm still fit for duty. Elena's hands trembled as she packed her father's rifle. And because if I miss, everyone will remember that instead of remembering him. I can't dishonor his legacy. Cunningham stood. With respect, that's bullshit. Elena's eyes snapped to him. Excuse me, you taught us today that fear keeps you sharp, that it's okay to be afraid as long as you perform anyway. Cunningham's voice was respectful but firm. You're not afraid of missing. You're afraid of what missing means, that the tremors are winning, that your time is running out, that you're losing the connection to your father. Watch your mouth, recruit. I'm right, though, aren't I? Cunningham didn't back down. You told us to face our fears. Now you need to face yours. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly she laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. You've got balls, Cunningham. Stupid, but you've got them. Is he wrong? Hollister asked quietly. Elena looked at the four of them young men who'd come to the range yesterday as arrogant children and were leaving today as students who understood how little they knew, who'd listened to her lessons and internalized them, and now had the audacity to throw those lessons back at her. She pulled out the leather journal and opened it to the final page. Her father's last entry, written the morning of the day he died. Read it, she said, handing the journal to Hollister. Hollister's voice was quiet but clear. If I die tomorrow, I die having taught warriors to survive. But my greatest student is the one I'll never see graduate. Lena, stop hiding. The world needs to see what I taught you. You're not just my daughter. You're my legacy. Prove it. Speed is fine, but accuracy is final. Now show them both. The words settled over the group like a benediction. He wrote that 3 years ago, Elena said, the morning before the competition, before the drill that killed him. He wanted you to compete, Pritchard said. He wanted me to stop hiding. Elena closed the journal. But hiding is easier than failing in public. Rangers don't hide, Brennan said. Isn't that in the creed, surrender is not a Ranger word? Elena looked at him with new respect. You memorized the Ranger Creed. My cousin was 2nd Battalion, killed in Iraq 2007. I grew up hearing him recite it. Brennan's voice was steady. He used to say that the creed wasn't just for combat. It was for life. Never quit. Never accept defeat. Never leave a fallen comrade. Your father is a fallen comrade, Cunningham added quietly, and you're leaving him behind by not shooting. Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 3 years. Grief, maybe? Or fear? Or the terrible weight of trying to be perfect enough to honor a man who'd never demanded perfection, only excellence. Tomorrow, she said, her voice rough, I'll compete one last time before I deploy. What event? Hollister asked. Whitmore's Ghost, the drill my father designed. 5 targets, 50 yards, 10 rounds, 60 seconds maximum. Elena's hands shook as she spoke. Perfect scores, 50 points, all center mass hits. He set the course record at 48 seconds, all 50s. You'll beat it, Pritchard said with young confidence. I won't. My tremors are too advanced. I'll be lucky to shoot clean at all. Elena met his eyes. But I'll shoot anyway. That's what he would have wanted. Not perfection, just the attempt. She shouldered her bags and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned back. Tomorrow's 0800, wear civilian clothes. This is a memorial, not a tactical demonstration. Show respect. Yes, Sergeant, all four said in unison. Elena walked to her jeep through the late afternoon heat, feeling lighter somehow, despite the heaviness in her chest. She'd committed to competing, to shooting her father's drill in front of judges and competitors who'd remember every miss, every hesitation, every sign that she was losing her edge. The smart thing would be to back out, to protect her reputation and her career by staying safely on the sidelines. But her father hadn't raised her to be smart. He'd raised her to be brave. And tomorrow, in front of Gaum and the military shooting community, she'd find out if she still knew how to be both. The alarm on Elena's phone buzzed at 0530, but she'd been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and running through the drill in her mind. 5 targets, 10 rounds, 60 seconds. She'd shot this drill 1,000 times as a teenager, hundreds more as an adult. But not once in the 3 years since her father had collapsed mid-string, his heart giving out while smoke still curled from the barrel of his M1 Garand. She sat up and looked at her hands in the pre-dawn darkness. They trembled worse than usual. Stress always amplified the condition. By mid-morning when the competition started, the tremor would be even more pronounced. She'd be shooting in front of veteran marksmen who'd known her father, who'd watched her grow up on this range, who'd remember her as the prodigy who could outshoot grown men before she could drive. They'd see her hands shake. They'd see her struggle. They'd see the decline. Elena pushed the thought away and dressed in simple clothes, black long-sleeve shirt, jeans, boots. She pinned her hair back in a tight bun military style despite the civilian setting. Some habits ran too deep to break. The drive to Desert Ridge Range took her through town as it was waking up. Sunday morning meant church bells and empty streets and the kind of quiet that felt both peaceful and lonely. Elena had been to plenty of memorial services in her military career. Too many friends lost to combat training, accidents, suicide after they came home. But her father's memorial always hit different. He died doing what he loved, teaching the next generation. There were worse ways to go. But she'd give anything to have him back for one more day. One more lesson. One more quiet morning on the range with just the two of them and a rifle between them. The range parking lot was already filling when she arrived at 07:15. Trucks and SUVs with gun cases in the beds. Veterans in ball caps marking their service branches. Civilians who trained under her father over the decades. The whole Arizona shooting community seemed to have turned out. Elena grabbed her father's rifle case and headed inside, trying to ignore the looks that followed her. People recognized her, Thad Whitmore's daughter, the Ranger sniper, the girl who disappeared from competitive shooting 3 years ago. She could feel their questions like physical weight. Hank stood at the registration table wearing a collared shirt for once instead of his usual polo. He looked up as Elena approached, and something like relief crossed his weathered face. "Wasn't sure you'd show," he said quietly. "Made a promise. To some recruits who called me on my bullshit. Smart recruits." Hank slid a registration form across the table. "Your daddy would be proud you're shooting again. He'd be disappointed in what I'll score. He'd be proud you showed up." Hank tapped the form. "Whitmore's Ghost Division. That's the main event. Doesn't start until 10:00. Gives you time to warm up." Elena signed her name with hands that shook badly enough that her signature looked like a seismograph reading. She pushed the form back and headed toward the competitor staging area, trying not to make eye contact with anyone who might want to talk. She didn't make it 20 feet before a voice stopped her. "Sergeant Whitmore." Elena turned to find an elderly man approaching late 70s, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to compensate for age without surrendering to it. He wore a Marine Corps ball cap and a shirt with Scout sniper insignia. Something about his bearing spoke of command, of decades of service, of authority that transcended rank. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "Have we met?" "Colonel Garrett Mackenzie, retired. I served with your father in Korea." Elena came to attention instinctively before remembering she was in civilian clothes at a civilian event. Old habits. "Sir, it's an honor." "At ease, Sergeant. I'm long past pulling rank." Mackenzie's eyes were sharp despite his age, studying her with the intensity of a man who'd evaluated thousands of Marines. "Your father talked about you constantly in his letters. Sent me photos of your competition wins. He was incredibly proud." "Thank you, sir." "I was at Frozen Chosen with your father. November 1950, 20 below zero, Chinese everywhere, ammunition running low." Mackenzie's voice took on the quality of someone reciting scripture. "We were pinned down on Hill 391, surrounded. Your father was just a corporal, then barely 20 years old. He took an M1 Garand with iron sights and spent 4 minutes systematically eliminating enemy positions." Elena had heard versions of this story before, but never from someone who'd been there. 17 confirmed kills in 4 minutes. Mackenzie continued, "Shooting from prone in the snow, so cold the rifle oil was freezing. He saved 42 men that day. They wanted to give him the Medal of Honor. He refused, said he was just doing his job." "That sounds like Dad. He also carried me 800 meters to the aid station after I took shrapnel to the leg. Then went back to the line and kept fighting." Mackenzie reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. "He asked me to hold on to something, said to give it to you when you were ready to shoot again." Elena took the box with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, yellowed with age, was a fabric patch, the expert rifleman badge from her father's Korea service. Beneath it lay a faded ribbon marking a presidential unit citation, and a note in her father's handwriting. Elena's vision blurred as she read, "Lena, tremors don't define you. Heart does. I shot with wounded hands in Korea. You can shoot with trembling ones. Don't hide from what you are. The world needs to see it." Make me proud. Dad. He wrote that 3 weeks before he died, Mackenzie said quietly. Mailed it to me with instructions. I've been waiting 3 years to give it to you. Elena couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She clutched the box like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. Your father once told me that courage isn't the absence of fear, Mackenzie said. It's performing despite fear. He said that's what separated the survivors from the casualties in Korea. Not superior training or better equipment, just the ability to keep functioning when everything screamed at you to freeze. He placed a weathered hand on Elena's shoulder. Shoot today, Sergeant. Not for the score, not for the competition. Shoot because that's what warriors do. We show up. We perform. We honor those who came before. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Mackenzie squeezed her shoulder once, then walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the range with a box full of ghosts and a challenge she couldn't refuse. The morning competition rounds passed in a blur. Elena found a quiet corner of the range and ran through dry fire drills with her father's rifle, letting muscle memory override conscious thought. The M1 Garand settled into her hands like it had grown there. 8 pounds of walnut and steel that knew her as well as she knew it. At 0830, Cunningham and his 3 friends arrived wearing civilian clothes as instructed. Jeans, plain shirts, no tactical gear in sight. They looked younger without the costume, more like the scared kids they actually were. You came, Elena said. Wouldn't miss it, Cunningham replied. Besides, we wanted to see the legendary Whitmore shoot. You might be disappointed. I haven't competed in 3 years. You won't disappoint. Hollister's voice was quiet but certain. Your father's journal, you said he kept it to teach lessons. Today you're teaching us another one, how to face fear in public. Elena felt something warm in her chest. When did you kids get so wise? Yesterday, Brennan said with a slight smile. You taught us. The morning rounds featured various shooting disciplines, precision rifle speed, steel tactical scenarios. Elena watched competitors move through their stages with practiced efficiency. Some were better than others. All of them were competent. The military and law enforcement shooters moved with particular authority, their fundamentals solid even if their speed wasn't impressive. One competitor caught Elena's attention, a woman in her early 70s shooting a vintage 1911 with the kind of smooth confidence that only came from decades of practice. She wore her silver hair in a practical bun and moved like someone who'd learned to compensate for age without surrendering capability. Between stages, the woman approached Elena with a knowing smile. You're Thad's girl, she said. I'd recognize that Whitmore scowl anywhere. He made the same face when he was concentrating. I'm sorry, do I know you? Margaret Sutherland. Everyone calls me Maggie. I shot against your father for 20 years on the competition circuit back in the 70s and 80s. Maggie's handshake was firm, despite the age spots on her hands. He beat me more often than not, but I got my wins in too. We had a good rivalry. He never mentioned competing against women, because he didn't think of me as a woman competitor, just a competitor. That's what made him special. He judged people on what they could do, not what they looked like. Maggie's eyes were sharp. He'd tan your hide if he knew you quit shooting. Elena stiffened. I didn't quit. I just stopped competing and stopped pushing yourself. Stop doing the thing he trained you to do. Maggie's voice was gentle but firm. I watched you grow up on this range, honey. Watched you outshoot men twice your age before you could legally drink. Your daddy used to say you were the best natural shooter he'd ever trained. That was before the tremors got bad. So you've got a tremor. So did he toward the end. Didn't stop him from shooting clean groups at 74. Maggie leaned closer. You know what the real problem is? You're not afraid of missing. You're afraid that missing means the tremors have won, that your time is up, that you're losing your connection to him. Elena felt like she'd been punched. That's the second time someone said that to me in 2 days. Because it's true, and because hiding from it isn't working. Maggie squeezed her arm. Shoot today. Not perfect, that's not the point. Shoot human, shoot real. Show everyone that excellence doesn't require perfection. At 0945, Hank's voice came over the range speakers. All competitors for Whitmore's Ghost Division, please report to lanes 1 through 5 for briefing. Elena's heart started hammering. This was it. No more delays, no more excuses. She picked up her father's rifle and walked to lane 1 where 15 other competitors were gathering. She recognized several retired military competitive shooters, even 2 active-duty Marines who'd made the drive from Camp Pendleton. All of them knew who she was. All of them were watching to see if the prodigy could still perform. Hank stood at the front with a clipboard, his voice taking on the formal tone of a range master conducting a serious competition. Whitmore's Ghost is a 5-target drill at 50 yards, 10 rounds, 60 seconds maximum time. Scoring is standard: 10 points for center mass hit, 9 for A-zone, descending to 0 for complete miss. Perfect score is 50 points. Course record is Master Sergeant Thaddeus Whitmore, 48 seconds, all tens. That record has stood for 3 years. He paused, and Elena saw his eyes find hers. We shoot in reverse order of registration. Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore registered last. She'll shoot final. Hank's voice softened slightly. Shooters, you know what this competition means. Thad Whitmore trained most of us. His techniques kept some of us alive. Today, we honor his memory by shooting with the fundamentals he taught. Make them count. The first competitor stepped to the line, a retired Army Ranger in his 50s, moving with the careful economy of someone who'd been shot at and learned from it. He shot clean, 58 seconds, 46 points. Solid performance, respectful of the course. The second shooter was one of the young Marines from Pendleton, faster but sloppier. 51 seconds, 42 points. Still respectable. One by one, competitors moved through the course. Some shot beautifully, some struggled. All of them treated it with reverence, understanding they were shooting a memorial, not just a competition. Maggie Sutherland shot 11th, her vintage 1911 barking with steady rhythm. 53 seconds, 47 points. The crowd gave her appreciative applause. Shooting that clean at 71 years old was remarkable. Cunningham and his 3 friends watched from the sideline, quiet and attentive. Elena noticed other competitors glancing at her between stages, wondering if she'd shoot at all or withdraw at the last moment. Finally, 15 competitors had finished. The best score was 48 points in 51 seconds, 1 point off her father's record, 3 seconds slower. Hank's voice: final competitor, Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore, 75th Ranger Regiment, shooting her father's rifle on the 3rd anniversary of his death. The range went absolutely silent. Even the competitors who'd finished stopped talking. Everyone understood what this moment meant. Elena stepped to the firing line, her father's M1 Garand feeling heavier than usual. Her hands shook visibly as she loaded the N-block clip. 8 rounds clicked into place with that distinctive metallic sound. She'd need to reload once during the drill, just like her father used to do. She pulled on her ear protection, his old Peltor muffs held together with tape and prayers. The world compressed into something smaller, quieter. Just her and the rifle and 5 targets downrange. Elena assumed the firing position her father had taught her when she was 8 years old. Feet planted wide, knees flexed, elbows locked into skeletal structure. The tremor was there, making her fingers dance against the woodstock. But her elbows didn't shake. Her shoulders didn't waver. Structure over strength, just like Dad always said. She closed her eyes for just a moment and saw him, young and strong in her memory, standing beside her at this same firing line, his hand on her shoulder, his voice in her ear. Slow is smooth, Lena. Smooth is fast is survival, but accuracy is final. Show them. Elena opened her eyes. Hank's voice: shooter ready. She nodded. Stand by ye. A pause that felt like an eternity. Then shoot. The world exploded into motion and sound. Target 120 feet to her left. Front sight found center mass. Press. Bang. The M1 Garand kicked back that familiar heavy recoil that lesser shooters couldn't handle. But Elena's structure absorbed it, channeled it, used it to help cycle the action. Target 2 center lane. Adjust press. Bang. Brass ejected in a golden arc, spinning through the air. Target 3 far right. Bigger adjustment, compensate for distance. Her hands trembled as she aligned the sights. Doubt crept in for just a second. What if the tremor threw the shot wide? What if she missed in front of everyone? Press. Bang. The rifle bucked. Muscle memory took over. No time to think, only to perform. Target 4 back to left. Her hands were shaking worse now, stress compounding the tremor. The front sight wavered as she tried to hold steady. She could feel the shake transferring to the rifle despite her locked elbows. Breathe, structure, press, bang. The shot broke clean, but she knew immediately it wasn't perfect. Felt it in the recoil and the way the rifle settled. That one had drifted. 9 ring, maybe 8. Target 5 center again. 3 rounds left in the clip, then reload. Bang, bang, bang. The clip ejected with that distinctive ping sound flying through the air like a steel butterfly. Elena's hands moved automatically through the reload drill she'd practiced 10,000 times. Fumbled slightly. The tremor was bad now. Really bad, her fingers barely cooperating. The fresh clip took 2 tries to seat properly. Precious seconds lost. She brought the rifle back up. 2 more targets. 2 more chances to prove she could still do this. Target 6 right side. The front sight danced in her vision, the tremor making it impossible to hold perfectly steady. Elena waited for a moment of steadiness that didn't come. Finally just pressed through the shake, trusting fundamentals over feel. Bang! Target 7, final target. Left side. Her shoulders were burning now from holding the heavy rifle. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely keep the front sight in the target area. Every instinct screamed that she should lower the rifle, take a breath, reset. But there was no time. 30 seconds had passed, maybe more. She was running out of margin. Front sight, center mass. Trust the structure. Trust the training. Trust Dad. Press. Bang! The rifle locked back on an empty magazine. Elena stood frozen for a moment, smoke curling from the barrel, the smell of burned powder hanging in the air like incense at a memorial service. She'd done it. 10 rounds down range. Every target engaged. Whether she'd hit them all was another question. Elena mechanically cleared the weapon, set it down, and removed her ear protection. The world rushed back in with sound and sensation. She could hear breathing, realized it was her own coming fast and shallow, like she'd just run a sprint. Hank's voice over the speaker, "Cease fire, bring targets forward." The electric motors hummed, and 7 paper targets began their slow journey from 50 yards to the firing line. Elena couldn't watch, couldn't bear to see the misses she knew were there. She stared at the concrete floor instead, watching her hands shake with post-adrenaline tremors. Cunningham appeared at her elbow. That was incredible. "I missed. I felt 2 shots go wide." "Doesn't matter. You shot. That's what matters." But it did matter. Elena knew it mattered. She'd shot in front of the entire Arizona military shooting community. She'd shot at her father's memorial on his course with his rifle. And she'd missed. The targets arrived. Hank and 2 other range officers moved forward to score them with careful attention, marking each hit with a pen tallying points. The silence stretched until Elena wanted to scream. Finally, Hank returned to the microphone. His voice was thick with emotion. "Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore. Time 48 seconds. Score 48 points. 8 10s, 2 9s. A pause while the number sank in. Ties the course record for score. Ties the course record for time. Sergeant Whitmore, that is the single most impressive performance we've seen on this course in 3 years." The range erupted in applause. Not polite golf claps, but genuine appreciation from people who understood what they'd just witnessed. Elena had shot her father's course at his speed, matching his score, all while fighting a genetic condition that should have made it impossible. Elena's knees went weak. She sat down hard on the shooting bench, her vision blurring with tears. She couldn't stop. 3 years of grief and fear, and holding it together, came pouring out in great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Maggie Sutherland was there, first arms around her, holding her while she broke apart. "He saw that, honey," Maggie whispered. "Wherever your daddy is, he saw that, and he's so damn proud." Colonel Mackenzie approached, moving slowly but with purpose. He stood at attention and delivered a crisp salute, retired officer to active duty NCO, honoring her performance. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant. Your father's legacy lives." Cunningham, Brennan, Hollister, and Pritchard surrounded her in a protective semicircle, not touching, but present. Their faces showed something Elena hadn't seen there before, not just respect, but understanding. They'd watched her face her deepest fear in public and perform anyway. They'd learned the lesson she'd been trying to teach. The award ceremony happened in a blur. Elena stood on a makeshift podium while Hank presented the second-place trophy. She'd been edged out by half a point by the retired ranger who'd shot before her. But that wasn't the trophy that mattered. Hank also presented a special award newly created, never given before. The Thaddeus Whitmore Spirit Award, he announced, his voice carrying across the now quiet range. Given to the competitor who best embodies the values Master Sergeant Whitmore taught: humility, perseverance, and grace under pressure. Inaugural recipient, Sergeant First Class Elena Whitmore. The plaque was simple wood with a brass plate, but it bore a photograph Elena had never seen her father and 8-year-old her standing at this very range, both grinning and holding M1 Garandons. She couldn't speak, could barely see through her tears. Just held the plaque and the patch from Korea and tried to remember how to breathe. After the ceremony, as competitors were packing up, Elena called Cunningham and his 3 friends together. "I want you to have something," she said, pulling items from her range bag. To Cunningham, her father's training notebook, 500 pages of handwritten wisdom accumulated over 40 years. And study this: every page is a lesson that kept soldiers alive. To Hollister, the page from her father's journal with his brother's name. "Your brother's legacy continues through you. Honor it by staying teachable." To Brennan, her father's iron sight adjustment tool worn smooth by decades of use. "For when your technology fails downrange and only fundamentals remain." Or to Pritchard, the Korea expert rifleman patch Colonel Mackenzie had given her. "You have natural talent. Use it to protect people, not to prove anything." All 4 of them stood speechless, holding their gifts like sacred objects. "You deploy in 3 weeks, Elena said. "I deploy in 2. If I hear that any of you got killed because you forgot your fundamentals, I'm going to be very disappointed." "Yes, Sergeant," they said in unison. Hollister stepped forward holding an envelope. "This is from all of us. Don't open it until you're downrange." Elena took the envelope, confused. "What is it?" "You'll see. Just when things get hard over there, open it. Remember that you changed our lives. Remember that we're staying humble and teachable because of you." They left shortly after, heading back to whatever base they'd come from, their leave ending soon. Lena watched them go and felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Maybe her father's legacy wasn't dying with her tremors. Maybe it was spreading through kids like Cunningham, who'd been humble enough to learn. The weeks before deployment passed quickly. Elena spent her remaining leave time at the range shooting slower now, focusing on fundamentals rather than speed. The tremors were progressing. She could feel it in the way her hands shook more violently, in the way it took longer to find steady moments. But she'd shot her father's drill. She'd faced her fear and performed. That counted for something. 2 weeks after the memorial competition, Elena boarded a military transport plane, heading to a classified location somewhere in the Middle East. The loadmaster secured her gear, rifle case, rucksack, body armor. Just another deployment for just another soldier. Except it wasn't. This was the last one. The final mission before medical retirement. The end of her career as a sniper. 3 days into the deployment, Elena found herself in an overwatch position on a rooftop in a city she couldn't name. Her spotter, a young ranger named Torres, had just confirmed their target through the spotting scope. "High-value individual, 1,200 meters, Torres said. "Wind from east 2.3 meters per second. Temperature 31 Celsius. You have the shot." Elena settled behind her M2010 ESR rifle, feeling the familiar weight and balance. Her hands trembled as she made final adjustments to the scope. The tremor was bad today. 3 days of stress and poor sleep had amplified it. She thought about withdrawing, letting Torres call in air support, not risking a miss that might compromise the mission. Then she remembered her father's note. "Tremors don't define you. Heart does." She remembered Cunningham's words, "You taught us to face fear. Now you're facing yours." She remembered Maggie Sutherland, "Shoot human, shoot real." Elena took a breath, let it out halfway, found that quiet space between heartbeats where the world became crystal clear. Her hands shook, her fingers trembled against the stock, but her elbows were locked. Her structure was perfect, and her fundamentals, drilled into her by 10,000 hours of practice, didn't fail. She pressed the trigger. The shot broke clean. 1,200 meters away, the target dropped. Torres confirmed through the scope. Target down. Clean kill. Outstanding shot. Elena cleared her rifle and sat back, her hands shaking worse now from adrenaline. But she'd made the shot, despite the tremors, despite the fear, despite knowing this was probably one of her last long-range engagements before retirement. She pulled the envelope from Cunningham out of her pocket, opening it for the first time. Inside was a photograph, all four recruits, standing beside her father's Hall of Honor plaque at the range the one Hank had installed after the memorial competition. They were in proper uniform now, crisp and professional. Behind them, barely visible, was Elena herself in the background of the photo, coaching another shooter. The note read, "Sergeant Whitmore, you taught us that warriors don't announce themselves. They perform. We're performing because you taught us how. Your father's legacy lives through you and now through us. Stay safe. Come home. We need more lessons. Dex Wade Kirk Nash." Elena tucked the photo into her helmet band where she'd see it every time she donned her gear. A reminder that teaching mattered as much as shooting. That legacy was about passing knowledge forward, not just accumulating kills. 6 months later, Elena returned from her final deployment with 0 additional casualties in her unit. She'd made 17 more successful long-range engagements despite progressing tremors. Her last shot had been at 800 meters, nowhere near her record, but clean and effective. The Army Medical Board gave her honorable discharge with full benefits. 8 years of service, 3 combat deployments, 47 confirmed kills that became 64 by the end. Bronze Star, Combat Action Badge, Ranger Tab, and hands that shook too badly now to meet qualification standards. Cunningham and his friends returned from their deployment 6 weeks after Elena. They met her at Desert Ridge Range where she'd started teaching 3 days a week, passing on her father's techniques to new students. "We used everything you taught," Cunningham said, presenting her with a shadow box they'd made. It contained a folded flag from their deployment, Elena's second-place trophy from the memorial competition, and a photo of her father in his Marine dress blues. The inscription read, "In honor of SFC Elena Whitmore and MSG Thaddeus Whitmore, the teachers who saved us twice, once through skill, once through spirit." There was a firefight, Hollister added quietly. "My rifle jammed. Double feed. I cleared it in 2.1 seconds. Exactly like you taught us. Saved 3 guys who were in my sector." "I knew you would," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. On a cool morning in late autumn, Elena stood at her father's grave in the Veterans Cemetery. The headstone was simple granite with his rank name and dates. She placed the memorial trophy beside it along with the Korea patch and a new addition, her own Ranger tab and Bronze Star. "I kept shooting, Dad," she said to the stone, "even when the tremors got bad, even when I was scared. I shot because that's what you taught me to do." She pulled out the leather journal, his journal now with pages she'd added herself. Names of students she'd trained, techniques she'd developed, lessons learned. "I'm going to keep teaching," she told him, "and keep passing on what you gave me. Maybe I can't serve downrange anymore, but I can make sure the next generation has the fundamentals to survive." Back at the range, Elena stood in front of a new class of 8 students mix of military law enforcement and civilians who wanted serious training. One was a young female soldier, 19 years old, fresh-faced and eager. "Before we shoot," Elena said, "we need to talk about fundamentals, about the difference between looking tactical and being competent, about staying humble and teachable." She demonstrated proper stance, feet planted, wide elbows locked into skeletal structure. Despite the visible tremor in her fingers, her shooting platform remained rock-steady. "Structure compensates for weakness," she said. "Build your foundation on bones, not muscles." The students leaned forward, captivated. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 6 years old," Elena continued. "He taught me that tremors don't define you. Structure does. Heart does. The willingness to show up and perform even when you're scared, that's what defines you." She looked at each student in turn. "I can't promise that following these fundamentals will keep you alive. My father trained 3,000 soldiers. 127 of them died despite doing everything right. But I can promise that fundamentals give you the best chance, and that's all any of us can ask for." The young female soldier raised her hand. "Sergeant Whitmore, can women really compete with men in marksmanship?" Elena smiled. "I set the record for longest female sniper kill in U.S. military history. I tied my father's course record at a memorial competition while fighting a genetic tremor. I trained 4 recruits who used those techniques to save lives downrange." She met the young woman's eyes. "Can women compete? We don't compete. We perform. And let the results speak for themselves." The class began in earnest. Elena moved among the students, correcting grips, adjusting stances, teaching the same fundamentals her father had drilled into her over 20 years. Her hands shook as she demonstrated. Her fingers trembled as she loaded magazines. But her voice was steady, her knowledge was sound, and her father's legacy passed through her to these students and on to the next generation remained unshaken. The rifle range echoed with controlled pairs and patient instruction. A new generation learning that excellence came from humility, not gear, from fundamentals, not flash. Elena's hands trembled as she corrected a student's grip, but her voice was steady. Her father's legacy lived not in perfect scores or records, but in every soldier who came home because they'd learned to stay humble and teachable. Speed was fine, accuracy was final, but showing up, that was everything.